Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tom Nuttall from The Economist. This is the final panel of the council meeting. I see that our ranks have been thinned a little bit, but hopefully we can keep you entertained for the next hour. We will be fixing our gaze on the future in this panel, 1 year in the future to be precise, to the European elections in May 2019, and in particular the role of La République en Marche in those elections. Emmanuel Macron, of course, is fixed on the European Parliament elections as a milestone in his EU reform plan. And next year his party will not only deliver lots of MEPs to one or other political grouping, but also the momentum and a certain authority that still attaches to the French president in his European agenda. President Macron, he's indicated that he considers the current groupings inside the parliament to be as rotten and as ripe for disruption as the French parties that he took apart last year. But this act of creative political destruction is a lot harder to pull off in 26 countries than in one. There is a lot of party fragmentation across the EU in many member states. It's perhaps the defining political characteristic, but that doesn't necessarily translate, of course, into support for sort of Macronist pro-European centrism. And the president himself has kept his cards fairly close to his chest. Will he start his own grouping? Will he align with the Liberals in the Parliament? Or does he have something else up his sleeve? And what does he plan to do about the dreaded Spitzenkandidaten system? So as you can see, our panel has been afflicted by its own creative destruction to a degree. Emma Bonino, as you all know, has flown home to save Italy, and we've also lost Ivan Krastev. But we do, to my left, have Pieyre-Alexandre Anglade, who is a member of the National Assemblee for En Marche, and who has also been involved in outreach to like-minded parties elsewhere in Europe over the last year or so. So tell us how that's been going.
Thank you very much for your invitation. I'm very delighted to be here and to be in this final panel. Well, maybe I will disappoint you because I won't answer straightforward to your question, but I will answer a bit maybe later on. Let me first of all say a word of context. We are, I guess you have been discussing it over the past 2 days, but we are in a very difficult situation in Europe. We are in a difficult situation because mainly 5 of the main member states are today facing internal difficulties. Obviously Italy, you said a word of it, and Emma Bonino, who cannot be with us this morning. Spain, where we have the Catalan crisis and now a motion against the government. Poland, where we see a government which is challenging all EU basic principles. Obviously the UK with the Brexit, and a complicated situation also in Germany with a coalition which is, let's say, weaker than it used to be. But if I may do this provocation, there is nothing new. I mean, it's business as usual, because this situation, we are experiencing it for 10 years now, maybe 15 years in Europe. And actually since 2005, and the French no to the Constitution, and the Dutch no to the EU Constitution, our Europe is in crisis. It has been the economical and financial crisis in the middle of the past decade. There's been the war in Libya, the war in Syria, the terrorism, the refugee and the migration crisis, then the gap which is always broader between the EU institutions and its people, and finally this ultimate crisis, if I may call it that way, which is the Brexit. And so in this configuration, I would say that the crisis that we are experiencing today are nothing new, but what is clear is that after this decade of crisis, we are in a situation of deep division within Europe, with political forces emerging which are challenging all the basic principles that we have defined together in the past at the beginning of the construction of the Union. That we are in a context, and maybe the expression is a bit strong, but I feel that way, we are in a context of intellectual civil war in Europe, where national egoism seems for some of us more important than what unites us and what makes us different from the rest of the world. We are in a situation where we do see some fascination for authoritarian regime and illiberal democracies in Europe. And I think that this cocktail of national egoism and fascination for illiberal and authoritarian regime is dangerous for Europe. And I think that if you take in consideration the international context today outside of Europe, we cannot afford the lux of division in Europe. And so in this context, we obviously have all together a responsibility. And this is somehow how my movement sees it. We do think that we need a deep reform of the European Union. We need a radical reform, because what the French people told us last year is that they want Europe, but they don't want this Europe. They want a reform Europe that will be able to save the migration crisis, that will be able to fight against the climate change, that will be able to protect them against terrorism, that will be able to make the Eurozone better functioning, which is not the case at the moment, and you see the situation in Europe. But if we do want to implement all these proposals, we need also some reforms within the European institutions. And I won't go through all the EU institutions, but obviously the way the Council is functioning today is not satisfactory. The rule of unanimity is blocking everything. And if you take at the European Parliament, you see political groups which are there for a very long time, the EPP, the SND, and some others, which are deeply divided from the inside, and who do not share anything in common together. And actually, we are trying to protect the system as it is today, because the system as it functions today in the European Parliament is comfortable for them, because they've got all the dominant position, and they don't want to change it. And that's the reason why we are today in the situation in Europe. And so we do think that if we continue in 2019 with the same system, with the same habits, with the same structure, first of all, there will be a Eurosceptic majority in this parliament, which is already more or less the case. You should take the situation on the transnational list. You had a vote in the European Parliament, where part of the EPP, together with the ECR, together with the EFDD, together with the ENF, made a majority. That was a Eurosceptic majority. And so in 2019, if you want all the policies that our Europe needs, we need to implement and to have a new political impetus within this parliament, because today we have almost no majority in the European Parliament. If you take all the issues related to international trade or to health and environment, today it's more and more difficult to find majorities, because all the groups, EPP, the SND, the ALDE group, the Greens, they are divided on those topics. So we are at an important moment of the project, and my conviction is that if we are not able to reform it, what happened in France last year, that was somehow a new impetus, a new political impetus. If we are not able to deliver something new in Europe, next time you won't have progressist, pro-European, Democrat forces coming into power in some of our member states, but it will be the Eurosceptic, the populist, and all the anti-European that will continue to progress in our continent.
Thank you very much. Maybe a bit later in the discussion we can drill down in some more detail into exactly what the strategy that you guys have to bring that about. But for now, I want to turn to Diana, who's going to give us some perspective from Sweden. Now, presumably the country is more fixed on its national elections, which are taking place in September, than the European elections next May. But Sweden is hardly immune from these forces of political fragmentation that we see in so many parts of Europe, that President Macron seems to see as such a fertile ground for his approach to politics. So are you expecting to be disrupted?
Well, Thank you very much. It's a pleasure being here. So I was asked to make a few remarks on how receptive Swedish party politics is on Marche-inspired disruption when it comes to European elections next year. And first, as Tom pointed out, we have general elections in Sweden this September this year, and we see a changing political landscape like in so many other countries. We now have 8 parties in parliament. We might end up in a situation where there are fewer, and we have the last weeks we've been talking, the press has only been writing about the collapse of the social democracy. I think that's a bit an overstretch, but anyhow, it's definitely shifting. And first, I don't think Sweden is up for a disruption on EU, sort of the EU agenda until we're over our own national elections. We formed a government, and the budget has been passed. But my point is, we're not immune to the changing mood and the fact that voters seem to be on the move. One good example is our second biggest city, Gothenburg, where a new party has managed to establish itself in no time at all, and where the Social Democrats have been running the city for 24 years now, are down polling at 15%. So, but to your question, Tom, if we're about to be disrupted by Macron on Marche, my short answer would be no, I don't think so. First, on the positive side, I think there is an enthusiasm in terms of seeing Macron, also because the election of Le Pen would have been horrific, and Macron represents something new and is pro-European, or is seen as energetic, and in a time also when the narrative is a bit that politicians or established parties run out low on energy, and it's also he had a very pro-European outlook at a time where it was much more seen as much more popular and easy to just do EU bashing. So that is very positive, that he bred some hope, at least for a time. That was before the crisis in Italy and elsewhere, that the European project could be sort of refined further. But still, my answer is no. So, and that's I think the first reason is European elections is not that big thing in Sweden as it is in France or in Germany, I think. But the level of participation is much lower. It was around 51% last time around, still high, but if you compare it to national elections, it was around almost 86% participation, so, or voter turnout, I should say. So there is a lower interest, but mostly I think it's because of the content. First, we are free traders. Macron is not seen as a locomotive for free trade. We are not, we have another view on the EU budget, and this will certainly be part of the debate given the next MFF. We want an EU, and this might be the key point, that we want an EU that holds together. We want to be in the core of the European work, and we're not part of the euro, and I mean, the idea that there would be a small core group that comes together and sets the agenda and drives it all is just not very attractive to us. On the contrary, we're more lean to stand up for enlargement, and we want to be part of the European project, and we want to have a seat at the table and a say, and we think that the benefits of EU comes from this being a united project. Yeah, so I think so far, I mean, the jury is still out there. We'll see what will happen. But so far, I think also there is a growing insight that France will be a much more important partner in many ways, or an interlocutor. But when it comes to building alliances to compensate also for the loss of UK, that's been a very strong alliance within security policy matters in free trade. I think it will come more natural, I would argue, to look elsewhere, Nordic, Baltic, Netherlands, etc. Thank you.
The New Hanseatic League, as it's sometimes called. Gordon, you're a former Prime Minister of Hungary. Under Viktor Orban, Hungary has turned itself into the sort of country that I think is on the other side of the intellectual civil war that Pieyre-Alexandre spoke of. You didn't mention Hungary by name, but it's clear that there are some pretty strong differences between the Macronist vision of Europe and the Orbanist vision of Europe. So can you give us some perspective on how this looks from Hungary? And maybe you can also touch upon this notion that Diana mentioned in passing of a kind of core Europe, whether we call it variable geometry, multi-speed, all of these metaphors. A lot of concern about these sorts of ideas in parts of Central Europe, fears about getting stuck in the slow lane. And this idea has been given fresh impetus by President Macron. So how does it look from your region?
Well, thank you. Let me start in a very generic way and come quickly down to answering your question. But I think we need to state some very obvious things to put our thoughts in a system. This is not going to be a pan-European election. In fact, it's going to be 27 national local elections. As we experienced in the past, many of these elections locally will be fought on, not primarily on the European topic, but much more on some local political dynamics. And the players in a given country, their popularity, their actual popularity at the time, will to a large extent drive the number of seats they get, as opposed to the big European issues that we are discussing here. If we forget this, then we get the strategy wrong. Second, it's not going to be a vote between two sides, the pro-Europeans versus the anti-Europeans or Eurosceptics. There are going to be many sides, and each and every country will have many sides and many tones or little colors in the spectrum. So it's very difficult it's intellectually misleading if you try to think of this as a big fight between the pro-Europeans and the anti-Europeans. The third thing that's very relevant here, I think, is every election has a key topic. And politics is usually fought around three major topics. One is redistribution, welfare, social economics. The second is identity. And the third one is security. And at different times, different topics can be on top of the agenda. This time, because Europe has three major unresolved problems, these three issues are up in the air, and it's a very critical choice by the political sides which agenda they are trying to promote as the number one issue, which ticket do they want to fight this out. I think Europe has three major unresolved issues. One is sort of the Eurozone, fiscal, financial issues, membership of Euro or not, and the North-South divide on economic terms. That's one huge issue, i.e. a fiscal union without a monetary union. The other big issue today on the European scale is we have created, just like we created the fiscal union without a monetary union, we have created a borderless union without creating external borders. So the whole issue of migration will be also seen in light of this issue. The third one, such unresolved issue in the EU, for the same pattern, we have created a joint foreign policy without creating a joint security and defense policy. So it's not working, it's toothless. These are top three issues for Europe to resolve, and this has national consequences. But going back to the three key topics, welfare, identity, and security, which side is going to choose what? And if I accept the simplification of Eurosceptics and sort of pro-Europeans, whatever it means, then it's looking from Central Europe, looking from Hungary and the region, it seems that these Eurosceptics, populists, have already chosen their agenda point, the ticket that they want to fight, and that's going to be migration. The Prime Minister of Hungary, the current one, went to see the European People's Party recently, where allegedly, he was told there are red lines that he cannot cross, otherwise he will be expelled from the EPP. He denied that coming out, and he said, no, we were discussing how my party can contribute to the European elections. Having come home, he said, then the next elections in Europe will also be fought on the ticket of migration, and we can contribute to that. It's difficult not to read it as a blackmail back to the European People's Party. You guys, if you kick me out, I'm going to fight it on migration outside the EPP and unite those in Europe who are on the same ticket. But if you keep me, I'll help you win, and you will have those many MEPs who will help you have a majority in parliament. So the EPP clearly has a big dilemma, which they haven't been able to solve in the last 8 years. So migration, and it's not just Viktor Orban, it's many other leaders in that camp in Europe. We want to fight it out on migration. It's a popular topic, it's an easy choice, and it can create a division line where there's hope to get a majority or significantly increase their position. That's a big challenge. That's the identity ticket, which is so relevant now. Now, for the other side, where I consider myself belonging to, and we can call it the Grand Marche movement, we can call it the pro-European, it's in a much broader sense. And even the mainstream European parties, CDU or others, belong there. They don't have a united front. They are much less united than the anti-Europeans, than the populists. And they have to choose which topic do they want to play this out on. Are they going into identity politics? Then they have to take on the anti-migration camp with a different message. It's a very difficult fight. They can try to put the European identity against that. Or do they play it on the security ticket? Mark Leonard published a very good study last year, Europe qui protège, explaining the Macron strategy. That's a kind of combination of identity, but much more is the security element, that Europe is a Noah's Ark that helps European nations to survive in the flood of globalization. That's a ticket where you can play the anti-Trump, the anti-Russia, the anti-China, the issues which are security, trade and other issues. You can put them under this flag, Europe is going to protect you. That's a logical choice, and it kind of deflects the migration, anti-migration attack. And then the third ticket is to play it out on the economy welfare issue. It cannot be, in that camp, it's the fear of losing the euro and the fear of losing Europe's economic might. Kind of the liberalism of fear, as yesterday Timothy Garton-Ash mentioned. That's a very interesting ticket. I don't think that's the winning one. You have to prepare to play that card, but probably the strongest card of this side, and what Emmanuel Macron got very well, is Europe qui protège, the defensive Europe, the Europe that protects you in the flood of globalization. Now, how does it look from our region? First of all, Central and Eastern Europe, yes, you have these populist governments in Poland and Hungary, a lesser degree in Slovakia and the Czech Republic. But if you look at the polls, which are very important in politics, 70% plus of the population of these countries are pro-European. If you ask them, is it better for your country to be inside Europe than outside? 70% or more in Hungary and Poland would say yes. So that's a very interesting, very strong ticket. And that's why it's very difficult for the populists to go against that. They don't go against our countries belonging to Europe. They say they have a fight with Brussels, they have a fight with migration, they have a fight with George Soros and others. They try to personify without talking about the European membership. That's a very important distinction, and that's a big reserve if the pro-Europeans can gather under if they can make this vote or a choice between inside Europe or outside Europe, then they have a chance to gather a majority between their many parties. If they try to play it if they let it happen on migration, then anti-migration in these countries also has a majority. It's an interesting dichotomy that you want to play. And finally, this is going to be an asymmetric war. People populists who play on the most basic human instincts of fear, greed, fear of change, fear of foreigners and xenophobia, have a much easier case to sell than those progressives or people who argue for a larger cause, because those people need to argue for patience and long-term versus short-term, and don't be instinctive but be considerate. That's a much more difficult ticket. That requires much more charisma. So a lot will depend on the actual politicians, the actual parties and politicians who will stand on the pro-European side versus the anti-European side, who are, because of their popular message, populists are popular, that's the problem. For them it's enough to have a mediocre guy in place. I'll stop here.
Thank you. We had the useful distinction that we made yesterday between the fear of the past and the fear of the future. Pieyre-Alexandre, I just want to take an idea that was mentioned in Gordon's intervention and sort of try to figure out how it maps on Marche's vision for how the European elections are going to proceed. Because, as he said, we're looking at 27 national elections next year, not one European election. Most of the issues that will be discussed will be national issues. That is what will drive people voting. And nevertheless, he's right, isn't he, when you talk about the common threats and the common issues, common challenges that the voters are thinking about across Europe. You see them everywhere, whether it's migration, whether it's security, whether it's economic reform and welfare. So how can you hope, especially now that this transnational seats idea has been shot down by the European Parliament, as you mentioned, how can you hope to foster some sort of sense of a European demos, a single democratic event taking place next year?
Well, if I would be able to give you a clear-cut answer to that, I would have solved the situation in Europe, and I think we could close the panel and go back to our member states now. But it's I mean, to be able to define how to create a European demos, it will need hours of debate, of research and thinking. The thing is that indeed Emmanuel Macron advocated, he was one of those defending on the idea of Andrew Duff and some others the concept of transnational list in order to create a transnational space where you could have at least the beginning, the start of a European democracy. And Macron, he defended it from the beginning. I remember the first speech he did in Strasbourg on Europe, even before to be a candidate for the presidential election. He was defending two ideas. The first one was the transnational list as a political answer to the Brexit. Because today, what makes me worried in this union is that we see the Brexit happening. We are negotiating it in a very Brussels way. That means technically perfect, but politically, what is the answer to the situation? And so the transnational list, it was one of the answer to this situation. So now a part of the parliament decided to kill it, even though it voted in favor of it in the past, just in order to preserve its own interest. Having said that, you can continue to fight for the idea. We will continue to do so. We will continue to try to implement it in 2024, and if not in 2024, in the future, we'll continue because we think it's a good idea. Because, as you said, in many member states, European elections are made on national topics, and in France it's the same. Most of the time, the European elections in France, they happen at the middle of the mandate of the president. And so most of the time it's a referendum on the national policies. And next year in France, all the opponents, all the other political parties will try to make it as a referendum, pro or against the policy of the government. But they won't be discussing European issues and what is the orientation that will take this union. So it will be our responsibility to orientate the debate on the European agenda, and I think that for that you need to have clear allies within Europe. You need to have a clear platform. You need to be able to integrate on your list people coming from other member states. If you are not able to do the transnational list, then try to do on your own list. I don't say that I don't know what we're going to do. So if a part of the continent is not ready to go forward to create this kind of European demos, let's try to force it and to create ourselves. But just to conclude, I think that you were speaking of divisions around Europe. I think that European needs to realize that even though if there are differences between Tallinn and Lisbon and Budapest and Paris, still we do have some things in common that states outside of Europe don't have. In Europe, we are very much attached to democracy, social balances, equalities, and you don't find all this future outside of Europe. And we've got the specificities in Europe that you don't find anywhere else in the world. If you look at the US, there is a strong democracy, but the social balances are not really there in the society. If you look at Asia, there is a strong free trade appetite, but democracy is not everywhere. And in Europe, we combine all these features. So I think that if we are able to focus a bit more on what unites us, and instead of what divides us between the north, the south, the east, the west, we can try to have this new impetus. But it's an intellectual fight. That's why I was speaking of intellectual civil war at the beginning of my speech.
I am going to push you a little bit on specificities. I mean, when you talk about allies in other countries, who do you have in mind? I mean, we hear that there have been connections between En Marche and Ciudadanos in Spain, for example, perhaps with the PD in Italy, New Democracy in Greece. Can you give us a bit of a clue as to who you've been talking to and where you find the most fertile ground for the sort of ideas that you've been mentioning here?
But you named few political movements in Europe, and indeed with some of them we are working closely. If you take at Ciudadanos, I mean there are some similarities with what we are and what we want for Europe. Ciudadanos is a young movement, even though it's older than us, and it has been developed in a different context, but they've got a young leader, they've got a pro-European agenda, a reformist one, and I think that we'll be able to work together in the future, and we already do it. But our way of seeing the thing is that we don't want to frame ourselves within one political family at the European level. And this is absolutely clear. I mean, we do have allies in the center, we do have allies in the liberal group. I mean, we liberal and Democrat, and we've got also people in the EPP, people in the SND, people with the Greens. I think it doesn't make any sense to say, here are our allies, and we'll just be discussing with you and not with the others. Our approach is to say, we don't have any kind of exclusivity in the relation. And so we speak with you, but we speak with you in your member state, but we can also speak with another party in your member states.
But you may need to, that might be fine for now, but you may need to formalize that arrangement after the elections, once it comes to thinking about who the next president of the Commission is going to be, once people are trying to assemble a majority inside the European Parliament.
Yes, absolutely. You need to formalize it sooner or later. And it will come for sure. You know, the European elections they are very close. At the same time, they are far away. We are a year from the election. So what we're gonna do? It will be very clear at some point. And I understand that some people have some appetite to know in detail what we're going to do, or you would like to say that we will go within the EPP, we will go within the ALDE group, we'll go with, but it doesn't work that way. As I told you, I think that the structure which are within the European Parliament, I don't speak about the European political party outside of the Parliament, I speak of the structure within the European Parliament. I think you cannot restart a new mandate with the same structure, with the same habits, and the same way of working. When I said that, I think it's quite clear, and so you need to work towards something different. I mean, what would be the political message to the Europeans if in 2019 we restart with the same rules? It will make no sense. It will make no sense. We are not in a classical situation. We are in this crisis for 15 years. So I think that there is the space within this parliament to think something different. I don't think, I don't want to say to destroy what exists. We don't want to destroy, we just want to build. We are not there to destroy everything. I think we need to create a political alternative, and with people which are in the center today, in the LD groups, most of our allies are there. But I want also to say that there are some people with whom we can work in the EPP, and some people with whom we can work in the SND. And you see that politics is not as it used to be in the past. I mean, if we would have think that way in France, we would have not done anything. We would have stayed with few people in the center.
It sounds very soothing, although I'm reminded of when Emmanuel Macron was thinking, when his fellow ministers got wind of the fact that he was setting up something called Grand Marche and asked him about it, he said, oh, it's just a discussion club, nothing too serious. So we'll see what happens inside the European Parliament.
I mean, it's extremely sad. I mean, honestly, I think we are the political forces in France that takes this election the most seriously. We do think that the European Parliament is not the second division of the political life. And in my country, most of the political parties see the European Parliament as the second division of the political life. And they think that the MEP that they should send to Brussels are those which have been defeated in the last elections, or the people, the old heavyweight of the politics. You don't know what to do with them anymore, so you put them into Brussels. But it doesn't work. That's why us in 2019 we have a very ambitious list. We'll have a pro-European agenda. We'll put the best people on this list, and we will not put les second couteaux, as we say in French. This is absolutely clear. But what we're going to do in the next parliament is too early to say, because the situation in Europe is as you know it's very unclear. So we are working at the moment to gather people, and then I think at the beginning of 2019 you will see the things clearly. But now, before the summer, taking the situation in Spain, in Italy, the situation in Germany, the crispation in Central Europe, it will make no sense that I will tell you we will do it that way with these people.
Okay, we'll go to questions in a minute. Diana or Gordon, is there anything that you wanted to pick up on in Pieyre-Alexandre's remarks there? Or we can turn to the audience straight away.
I think you're doing your job, but you're unfair. I mean, they are right tactically. Why would they come out now? You can only come out in politics when you are fully ready to take on the war. If you're not, you will be slaughtered. So yes, I think keep pushing, but if I were you, I wouldn't give away anything.
Well, thanks for the help. So we only have about 10 minutes, so I'll take a group of questions, and there's quite a few. So please be as brief as you can, because we only do have 10 minutes. Tell us who you are, and preferably make it a question rather than a comment. So maybe we'll start over here. Do we have the mics? And then we'll go to the back.
Hi, it's me. Hi. I entirely agree that there is a polarization in the politics of the EU, and on the two poles are clearly Macron and Orban. And despite the fact that we haven't got transnational lists, that they were killed off by the EPP, because the EPP now is not the old Christian Democrat federalist party that it once was, but it's now a power apparatus concerned only to keep in power. But despite the problems that we will confront, as we know, that having a fractured election, the elections to the European Parliament are important because they determine the leadership of the institutions. It's not just the President of the Commission, that's clearly the important thing that it does form, but the leadership of the Parliament itself, whose calibre has been rather poor, if I may say so, over the last number of years, and could easily be improved through a constructive, successful, competitive election to the European Parliament. And a thing that is going to happen, despite the fact that we haven't got transnational lists, is that the EPP is going to find a Spitzenkandidat. Now, personally, I think that in the absence of transnational lists, that's a bit fictive. I don't think it is very serious, but it is going to happen. And if the EPP do it, and it could be a Frenchman, who knows, with experience of Brexit, that would help.
Yes.
But if the PPE is going to do it, then all the other groups and parties are going to have to do it too. And so my plea to Pieyre is to prepare for this eventuality in advance, and to get organised with the Macronist forces that exist across the EU.
Thank you. It could also be a French woman, of course. Okay, well, go to the back. We've got two here at the back, and then please be brief.
One second.
I have one here.
Thank you. Peter Forward, Global Affairs Correspondent for the Christian Science Monitor. For Pieyre-Alexandre, Anglade, do you intend to have candidates in all the countries fighting the elections under la Grand Marche identification, specifically identified, or are you looking for a looser alliance of like-minded people who will fight the elections on their own existing political institutions?
Thank you. And then just behind you, we had a question.
Thank you. Lucinda Creighton. I'm a former minister and a former vice president of the EPP, so I have particular interest in this discussion. I think what you aspire to achieve is very noble. I think it's needed. I think we need reform in our political movements across Europe, and we need a much greater sense of a demos. But I do fear that that the approach is somewhat naive. I might be proven wrong. But I think that if you look at the success here in France, it was very much aligned to the implosion of the two main political parties, and we are not seeing that in the context of the pan-European parties, the EPP, the Socialists, ALDE, are all still intact. So I just wonder, this kind of ponderous approach, I think, as Andrew has pointed out very effectively, could very well mean that it'll be too late, and your movement, a massively important pro-European movement in France, could actually end up missing the boat and being somewhat excluded from the institutions, from key leadership roles at the end of this process.
Okay.
So I just think, and the other thing that I would just mention is,
briefly, please.
Don't underestimate the concern of smaller countries with this idea of a new movement being led, driven ideologically and every other way by France.
Thank you. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get to everyone, but we had some right in the back here, or maybe not anymore. Okay, here. Thank you.
Thank you. Being Italian, I'm a little bit skeptic about your business as usual. Speaking of the sovereignist movement, unfortunately in Italy, I think we are experiencing the worst crisis ever. But leaving Italy apart, you said that the French asked President Macron Europe, but not this Europe. What could be the upgrade? France is ready to give up to some part of its national sovereignty for favoring more Europe. Thank you.
Okay, and then we had two here, and then I think we're going to have to wrap it. Please be brief, and then we'll go back to the panelists for final remarks.
My question is regarding whether there's going to be a generational divide in the European elections. I mean, it was really clear in Brexit. And I actually looked at the survey of the 2014 elections. Young people were more in favor of Europe, but voted much less and made that decision about voting much later in the process. So what would be a way to capture the imagination of the youth and address that generational divide? Thank you.
Thank you. And then the final question, the woman at the front. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Lolita Siga, and I am a member of parliament from Latvia. Not all of us are lucky to defeat populists, and some of us even have to work with them in governments. Hence, I have a question to Diana Janse. Do you at all contemplate the possibility to work with Swedish Democrats in the next government?
Thank you. Okay, we have 2 or 3 minutes, so just choose the questions that you wish to answer. Maybe Gordon will start with you, or
What's the message to the youth and in a broader sense, what unites Europe? Well, first of all, European demos doesn't exist. There is no pan-European political sphere that goes deep down enough to the voters. That's why we have national elections. I think 150 years ago, when Italy's first parliament got together, a famous Italian politician went out and said, "We have created Italy, now we need to create the Italians." Now, judging from our missing colleagues here, it's still a work in progress and a muted success. But what we don't have is a European, the Europeans as a political community at the moment. And Macron is trying to address this issue. It will be a very long issue. It will be several elections. What this crisis brought is that most European citizens have realized that many of the problems that they have cannot be solved at their national government level. It can be solved in Brussels. First, the financial markets found out, then the electorates of Greece and others. In Greece, they realized the old saying of Henry Ford, who said, you can buy this car in any color as long as it's black. You can have any government, 3 in succession, as long as the same policies are continued. That's a big dilemma for European democracy, medium term, and we are not going to solve it at this election, but we can make a big step forward. So, the ultimate answer to this youth issue, I think democracy is, for most of the electorate, is not an end, but a means to solve their problems. If other solutions exist, they would go for that. So we need to find, not just talk about democracy at the European level, we need to find solutions and communicate them in this campaign about security, about identity, and about distribution and economy.
Okay, thank you. Diane, I mean, you had one specific question about Sweden Democrats and any other closing thoughts?
Yeah, I have the answer to the specific question is simply no. I want to also comment on what you said on small countries' concerns and the lack of will to be led by France. I think there is certainly truth in that, and I think the jury is still out there when Macron brands himself as pro-European and he wants to carry or be the voice of Europe out on the global arena, that he actually means and pushes for truly European interests and not European interests, but saying that, but meaning French interests. And so, yeah, I just wanted to make that point.
Thank you. Okay, closing thoughts. Yeah, Alexandre.
Yeah, thank you for all the questions. I mean, you can be a bit sarcastic, you can say that we are naive, you can say that we are dreaming, but if you want, we can directly shut down the project if we continue the way we have been doing politics in Europe for the past 20 years. I'm sorry to say, but the traditional political movements, which are in many member states for 40 years, 50 years, since the end of the Second World War, those which are for 20 years having the power in the European institution, look the situation they have put Europe today. So you can say that it's a bit naive, we won't achieve anything. Fine, we can continue like that. We can continue with the statu quo, with the immobilism that is the situation in this Europe, which has led to this situation of deep crisis. And you know, I just recall that a year and a half ago, after the Brexit, everybody thought that in 6 months later, it will be Marine Le Pen who will be elected in France. And if it would have been Marine Le Pen who would have been elected in France, we will not be here all together speaking about the future of the project. It will be the end of this project. I think that people in Europe maybe need to realize it a bit better. So what we want to do in 2019 is not about France, it's not about hegemony, it's just about being able to reform this Europe, because if you don't reform it, if you don't change it, what's happening in Italy will happen in all the other countries. It will happen in France tomorrow. It will be the end of this project. So you can stay in the confidence of your situation, with the EPP on one side, the SND on the other side, the ALDE comfortably installed in the middle, and where everybody has its own place, and where everybody is comfortable, because no one is taking decision. No one. And so me and the movement I represent, we are not satisfied with that, and so that's why we want to create something new. That's what we want to propose. France is not imposing anything. France is proposing something. And when Macron spoke in La Sorbonne, No one else in Europe could have done it at this moment. Merkel had no government, situation in Italy was complicated, Spain as well, UK is leaving, who else would have been taking the leadership? So it was not for France, it was for Europe. So now if you want to see it as a hegemonic perspective, I mean, it was not made for that, but if you want to make a caricature and say it's for France, it's a French Europe, this is not at all the case. This is not at all the case, and many of the proposals are not made for France, they are made for Europe. And I think that if you look, honestly, the way Macron is doing politics today in Europe, is do it in a very different way than the French president used to do it. And in the past, France was taking care, was working with the southern Mediterranean countries, Germany was working with northern and central European countries, and you had this implicit division in Europe. But if you see the way Macron is considering the rest of the continent, he's not only addressing the southern European countries together with Italy, he's also speaking to central European countries. Look what happened on the posting of worker directive. He went directly into those countries to try to convince and to have a deal. And so we are very much attached to the European unity, but also it doesn't mean uniformity. So we can stay like that. I mean, I think we can discuss it in 5 years again, and then there won't be any European project. And now to answer the final question of the journalist, we don't want to have la Grand Marche Europe. This is not for us, clearly, and we are absolutely clear about that. We perfectly know what can be the feeling of a country like France imposing itself as the leader of something. We don't want to create a list of la Grande Marche everywhere in Europe. We just want to propose a political alternative, and then we can find a name of together. We need a team for Europe in 2019, and this team will build it with some other people, those who are conscious of the situation.
Thank you very much. A passionate